This is Sonic Shred 2.0. You might have seen the Sonic Shred video I put out a couple days ago, and maybe you wanted to see more gameplay or get more questions answered. So I put this video together for you guys so you can have everything you need to make the build as strong as possible. But if you haven't seen the first video, you should definitely check that out after this one, or just pause this and watch that first. First off, I'm going to show you guys some gameplay from my preferred version of the build, which is with the Spear of Lycander. If you're interested in using this version of the build, this is the gear setup for it. I'm running a tier 100 vault, and I'm trying to skip through as fast as possible, so you might see me skip some loot, but I'm a bit of a loot goblin, so I end up picking it up anyways. As you can see, this build is incredibly fast. It's also got plenty of damage, and because you're getting shrine buffs that last extremely long, you end up doing way more damage than you would with any other build. And the speed of the shred allows us to utilize the shrine buffs even better than most other builds would. Make sure you pay attention to my trample and my debilitating roar. As you can see, I always wait for another kill before I use one of them. That's because Hunter Zenith is going to allow me to not have a cooldown on it after I get a kill. So what I tend to do is kill an enemy and then use either trample or debilitating roar, and then I'll kill another enemy and then I'll use the other one. Sometimes I'll use the same one back to back, but I try and alternate them typically. You want to make sure you're using the trample every few seconds so you can get the extra damage from Tybalt's Will, and you want to use debilitating roar every few seconds to make sure you're reducing enemy damage. This is especially important if you're near elites or any type of enemies that you think could kill you. Now you're bound to mess up and put your ability on cooldown sometimes, but usually as long as one of them is off cooldown, you'll be fine. Trample ends up being a great defensive skill because you can knock enemies back and stun them. It's also a quick escape if you need it. Be careful not to double tap your button because you might accidentally double cast debilitating roar and then you'll put it on cooldown. Make sure you prioritize critical hit in this build because if you don't get your crits, you're gonna feel like this build falls flat. This is especially true if you're using the two-handed version of the build. And don't be afraid to use your ravens on enemies if you want a little more critical strike chance against them. Also, I recommended Bestial Rampage as the keystone passive in the previous video, and I still recommend Bestial Rampage as the keystone passive if you're doing bosses, but I decided Ursine's Strength is going to be better for dungeons because you get a consistent 25% damage multiplier, and we also get really good uptime on the 20% maximum life. The spear version of the build does less damage than the two-handed axe, but it feels so insanely good when you get good shrine buffs that I think I prefer the spear, but feel free to try both of them and see what you think. Either way, if you're doing a lot of bossing, you're probably going to want to use the two-handed axe. Now I'll let you guys watch me clear this vault room before we move on to the next variation of the build. Next up, I'm going to show you some gameplay with the two-handed axe in a tier 100 dungeon. To run this version of the build, this is the gear setup we need, and the only difference from the previous build was the weapon and the amulet. Here we've moved our shepherds to our two-handed weapon, and since we're not using a unique, we get one more aspect slot, which we're putting Stormclaw on. As you can see, the two-handed axe has more damage, but it also has less attack speed and less critical strike chance. So I highly recommend a critical strike elixir when you're using this build. Also, your armor when you're in werewolf form should be 13,300 when you're not in town. Once you go outside, you can just attack once with shred and you can see how much you have. If you struggle doing any solo content with this build, you're doing something wrong. So try and use this video and the previous one to figure it out. Or you can stop by my Twitch stream or the community Discord and I'll help you out. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, why don't you hit the like button, drop me a comment, and subscribe. For this variation of the build, this is the gear setup. For this one, we revert the amulet back to shepherds, and we're also going to be running a waxing gibbous and an accelerating. Now, you could run this as is, but the real value from running this version of the build comes from snapshotting. So if you're not interested in snapshotting, this isn't the one for you. However, if you do want a snapshot, let me show you how you can do that. First off, what snapshotting means is you can get the bonus from a two-handed weapon while only having the normal bonus equipped somewhere else. In order to accomplish that, when you go in the dungeon, you're going to want to have all of the stuff that you plan to snapshot taken off of your build. Then you want to equip the two-handed version of it. So for example, here we've got retaliation on our two-hander. Now if we equip our gloves that have the lower retaliation, we can take off the two-hander, and now the gloves have the bigger effect from the two-handed weapon. And that actually works the same in reverse. So if you reverse that order, you would actually get less, even if you left the two-hander on. Once you've snapshotted your retaliation, then you can put on your two-hander for your accelerating. Now once your two-hander's on, you can just right-click your totem, and it's going to replace the two-hander, but it actually snapshotted and kept the bigger number from here. Then we just throw on our one-hander and we're good to go. Now, if you were to zone in or out of the dungeon, you'd end up having this reset and you'd have to do it all over again. So make sure you do it all once you get in the dungeon. Now here's some gameplay clearing a tier 100 using this version of the build. As you can see, the guaranteed crits from Wax and Gibbous are actually quite nice. We may have smaller damage numbers, but we're still doing good damage. This definitely feels like the snappiest version of the build, except for when we get the shrine buffs on the spear version. But all three builds have their own strengths and weaknesses. Now I'm going to let you guys watch the rest of the gameplay, and I'll see you in my next video. Would you believe me if I told you I've fallen asleep many times while editing this video?